Starvation mode is something that we hear lots of influencers over the years talk about it. So let's go ahead and talk about this. All right, starvation mode. And in fact, unfortunately, some evidence-based coaches have promoted it as well. About 10, 11 years ago, this was a massive debate online. A bunch of dietitians, medical doctors chimed in, discussed the evidence, and pretty much buried it under the weight of evidence and basic biology. But the idea here is that starvation mode means if you drop your calories too low, or maybe you used to do excessive amounts of cardio, your body, even in a calorie deficit, will slow your metabolism down so much that you stop losing body fat. Okay? Not only do you stop losing body fat, but in theory, you can actually start gaining body fat and gaining weight, gaining body fat, not just water weight from cortisol and stress. Okay. And here's the problem with this idea. When you look at the sum total data, not only have we debunked it and we have alternative explanations, we actually have had studies that explain why people in the metabolic ward believe that this is happening to them, okay? Which is really the most interesting data set that we have. But all right, first of all, before we go into why it's even impossible, there were some starvation studies called the Minnesota Starvation Studies done 50 years ago. And what they did, they took a bunch of these men, and I believe they were military volunteers, if I recall. They put them into this study where they volunteered. They put them on something insane like 500 calories a day. They took skin folds and body fat measurements and put them on here for an extended period of time, right? And what do you think happened? Again, these were volunteers. They continued to lose body fat for months. So even these people are like 2 months into this on these starvation level calories. Every single week they lost body fat. Their body fat measurements went down every single week, no matter what. Okay? And that's the thing that we notice in a true calorie deficit, no matter how low it is, even if your weight stops, your body fat measurements go down because you just hold more water. So skin fold measurements tend to go down, waistline, all that stuff, no matter what. Because you will hold water sometimes. If we drop calories too low, we'll hold water weight due to cortisol and all these other factors, and then it'll finally eventually whoosh off. Or sometimes people go, well, you just need more calories. Well, that came from the idea that sometimes when people are stalled in weight loss and we bump their calories just a little bit or add carbohydrates, all of a sudden they lose 2 or 3 pounds within a week. It's sometimes overnight, out of nowhere, if they've been stalled for 3 weeks straight. Okay. Well, what really happens there, and this is what we know looking at the data, is that little extra carbohydrate and that little extra insulin lowers cortisol temporarily. All right. Sometimes when you're in a calorie deficit, your body tries to maintain homeostasis and it elevates stress hormones. They cause inflammation and make you hold extra water for a little while because your body tries to reach that homeostasis and slow it down. Okay. So this is really what we know happens. And so it's not saying your metabolism can't slow down a little bit. You can have metabolic adaptations because the human body is not 100% efficient at burning calories. So it can adjust inefficiency a little bit to try to keep you alive. Okay. So you can have small changes in your metabolic rate and energy output. Not really metabolism, but things like movement. You'll fidget less, you'll slow down, you'll get lazier so that you burn more calories. And it is your brain playing a trick on you to keep you alive. So that's the idea. Your brain doesn't want you to starve to death, so it does that. Okay? The other thing that's been looked at is that energy cannot be created from nothing. So in other words, like I remember Dr. Avi, and I can't remember his last name now, addressed all this all those years ago and pointed out the mathematical physics minimums for a human to do some of this cardio. Because we had bikini prep coaches saying, well, I've had female clients who are doing X amount of number of steps on these things in a day, and I've got them with these calories, and they not only don't lose weight, they gain weight. And he pointed out that mathematically, the basic laws of thermodynamics prevent that. Even if your metabolism drops to 0, they were clearly lying. Because their body weight versus the movement required, the minimum calories needed to do that for the amount of steps at the intensities they were doing on an actual meter, the laws of physics required a certain amount of energy burn. Okay, and he kind of broke that down and said, well, either you're lying or your clients are. Okay, Because what we find in the lab, in the metabolic ward, this doesn't ever appear. Like in controlled studies, to where either food intake is strictly measured and you are locked up from getting other food, like you don't have access, or when they're put in the ward, the more ethical ones, to where they're filmed 24/7, and the researchers count and track everything that they eat, even if they mess it up. It never occurs. So this starvation mode never actually is replicated in the lab. Okay? Now, when you get people, and this is where they get upset, and I'm going to give the explanation, and I'm going to give the explanation without making you feel bad. Your brain plays a trick on you. All right, and this has been the interesting one. We have found it in the research. We've replicated the ability to create the delusion in the brain that you ate less than you did in starvation. So what starvation mode actually is a form of psychosis. So if someone says, I'm not lying, I'm not crazy, it's like, well, technically you are crazy. Why? Because you put yourself into starvation and your brain went mad. Okay? Now, that's not your fault. It was your fault because you tried to starve yourself, but it's not your fault that you had a delusion. Okay, and we found it works in the lab. It's replicatable. So what happens is when you put people on diets that are so restrictive, they start hitting like 1,000 calories a day, particularly, it's been noted in women particularly, which makes sense because biologically women can't afford to do that. It's due to hormonal reasons, it is more dangerous for them and their hormones and long-term health, right, than it even is to men. So they have better built-in survival mechanisms to prevent this from happening. So what ends up happening, they binge and then have amnesia. And when I mean amnesia, they literally swear, and they put them on polygraphs, that they didn't do the binge food, pass the polygraphs, swear up and down, even knowing that they were filmed, and then when confronted with the video evidence of them eating the extra 2,000 calories that they didn't think they were eating, because the metabolic wards where they do this, they film them 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And they've consented to this. They literally don't remember eating the food. So what ends up happening when you try to starve yourself, and we found in these cases, you said it's not metabolic damage, it's metabolic derangement. In order to keep you from starving yourself to death, your brain, in this case, literally seems to have the ability for many people to force you to binge eat and then completely forget that you did it. Complete amnesia. They're really not making it up. They really don't think they ate the food. But it's a starvation-induced binge and psychosis. Okay? That's the most likely explanation for the metabolic damage and starvation mode that we see in people. Because the other never actually happens. We can't seem to replicate it in the lab, but the amnesia, we can. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I'll talk to you guys and gals next time.